Afternoon. The more observant of you will notice that I am not Henry Hill, much as I love him, and have stepped in at the last minute. I'm going to have to get used to saying this. I am Giles Dillnot. I'm the editor of Con Home. Thanks very nice of you.
Oh yes, of course you are. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Marvellous.
I got 100 something WhatsApp messages congratulating me on my job at 9 o'clock last night. They all ruined it by having the second line, and can you get us into your party? And I was like, oh yeah, no, all right. Well, suddenly friends with everybody. Welcome to this panel. Thank you to PMI for this. What I'm going to do is, it's always better, they know better about what they do, and a little bit of an explainer to you. So I'm going to go across the panel just to give you an explanation of who they are, and then we'll start off. Duncan.
Thank you very much, Giles, and thank you very much for hosting us today. So I'm Duncan Cunningham. I'm the External Affairs Director for Philip Morris here in the UK. I've been in the industry for nearly a decade, but I joined Philip Morris about 2 years ago. And one of the reasons I joined was because I was very excited about the thread that runs right through the heart of the company, from the very top right through to the very bottom. And that's all about helping the country go smoke-free. So for us now, over 40% of our global net revenues come from reduced-risk products. And I think that we are at an exciting inflection point here in the UK. So it's great to have the opportunity to be able to discuss the issues and see how we can accelerate getting towards a smoke-free future.
It's a Conservative Party conference, so a lot of people will know this man, but go ahead anyway.
Yes, I'm Steve Baker. I'm the former member for Wickham, who regrettably is now a poor, unemployed slob. And I'm very much looking forward to getting into the substance of this debate.
And I'm Kate Nichols. I'm Chief Executive at UK Hospitality, which is the national trade body for hospitality businesses, 700 member companies, 150,000 outlets across the UK, employing 3.2 million people and generating £140 billion of revenue. So as a sector, we are bigger than automotive, aerospace and pharmaceuticals put together.
Yeah. There we go. Doug, you said you've been in the industry a very long time, and you could notice, I've been to conferences with people in the industry saying, yeah, we're going to advocate for smoke-free. And, as a simple journalist, one came at that and said, that feels like Turkey's voting for Christmas. Why is it important? Why is that where the industry's at?
I think our focus is on the existing 6.4 million adult smokers that are still in this country. We are a company that is in transition and going through a huge transformation. And for us, it's a transformation that has a purpose to it, but also has a demand. I think what I've seen in my time in the industry is the huge impact that market forces have had. If you think about the innovation through vaping, through heated tobacco products, through nicotine pouches, these are all regulated alternatives that have really helped adult smokers switch to less harmful alternatives. And I think that's something we want to continue to encourage and we want to accelerate.
And was that something, do you think, that the industry accepted, because if it didn't, it wasn't going to be able to justify selling products that they did eventually accepted were harmful?
Well, I can't speak for the industry.
Right.
I can only speak for ourselves. And for us, it is about supporting the 6.4 million adult smokers switch. And for me personally, when you see that there is a better way, then that's obviously a thread that you want to draw on.
I guess it's just, do you smoke?
I used to smoke.
There you are, a living proof. Steve, big smoker?
No, absolutely not. I despise smoking. I used to smoke cigars over dinner when I was a young Royal Air Force officer, young and stupid. But my wife, in fact, it actually happened while we were engaged. My wife was sitting opposite at the table at this dining-in night, and I lit up a cigar. I tell you, the look she gave me, that was the end of me ever smoking cigars. So I do despise smoking because it's killed a number of people I love, and it's harmed a number of people I hold with great affection. And, I really do despise it. I wish people would stop. However, of all of the tyrannies, a tyranny exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. So while I may detest smoking, I detest the nanny state more. Smokers today don't do any harm to anybody else because they can't smoke indoors and expose other people to secondhand smoke. I checked this with an economist, but don't ask me for all the facts, but I'm sure it's contested anyway. Smokers cost the exchequer less because they die quicker sooner and don't claim their pension. Now, why anybody would want to smoke, knowing the harm that it does to them, I don't know. I was at another event yesterday where someone made the case for smoking and said that life needs to be about more than health. It needs to be about more than joy. More than health needs to be about joy and pleasure. What is the joy in exposing yourself to such a grave risk? I don't get it. And yet I do believe that those who are only harming themselves should be allowed to get on with it if that's what brings them pleasure. Personally, I like to risk my life by jumping out of aeroplanes.
I was going to come to that if you didn't.
That is a very different risk, of course. It's much safer than motorcycling, which I also like to do. But the point is I like to do these things, and I recognise that they're risky, and it's my life I'm risking. And I'm afraid the socialisation of health and benefits risks has led to this entitlement of we, the collective, as in the question, to believe that we're entitled to force our views on people who are doing no harm to others. And I think that must stop. I think it's at the absolute heart of what is wrong with the Conservative Party, that we have allowed ourselves to believe that there is some kind of we which is entitled to impress its views by force on others for their own good. So I could go on at some length, but what I would say is I really do.
We've got you here for a while.
Yeah, as somebody who despises smoking for good reason, I do really welcome Philip Morris International's attitude that you're trying to create a smoke-free generation. I shall moderate my views about the absolute evil of tobacco companies. Oh dear, I've said it. But you know, it's good that you want to produce alternative products. I don't know why people want the pouches or to vape or whatever else, but you know, they do want to do it, and they should be entitled to do it. They smoke outside, they don't harm anybody else, and they probably save the taxpayer money. So I think we've got to be really clear that people who are not harming someone else should be allowed to go their own way in peace.
Kate, you know, people going for a pint and a cigarette was some of my staple 20s, quite frankly. UK hospitality has had a pretty rough few years recently. There are plenty of people who want to use your industry's offer and don't want smoking around. Where are you on this?
I think I'm probably largely with Steve on this one. You know, I think if you've got a legal product that is available to people to use and we're nudging people in the right direction, we have a smoke-free by 2030 strategy. It's been in place for quite a number of years and it is working quite progressively. I have to say, smoke-free by 2030 still has 5% of the population smoking. When we introduced the indoor smoking ban in 2007, we had 27% of the population smoked. A larger proportion of that obviously were hospitality customers because that is part of the socialising that went on at the time. Currently, you've got about 12% of the population, so we've halved it over that period. We're looking at halving it again to be able to eliminate it and transition to that smoke-free. That seems to me as a sensible progressive move to try and look at deterring people from smoking, helping smokers to quit, helping smokers to move away from it. But you do have to have an acceptance that people are smoking and do smoke, and you need to have provision for those people. Otherwise, the danger is if you have too restrictive a set of legislation, particularly when you're looking at regulating and banning outside smoking, the alternative will be that they will smoke in their homes, or they will smoke and congregate in areas on the street that could be then more harmful. Back to Steve's point about what we're trying to do is to protect people partly from themselves, but also protect them from when they're harming other people. actually, what we've done post-COVID, when we had, with the help of Steve and others, we did introduce tables and chairs outside. We gave deregulated permissions to put tables and chairs outside of hotels, pubs, bars, restaurants, cafes. They are now segregated areas, so you have smoking and non-smoking areas. That was part of the legislation and the guidance. So we're making sure there is no harm. If we're nudging people in the right direction to be able to move towards smoke-free and either give up or die out, then I don't see that there is a need for further interventionist regulation to be able to do that. And at the same time, there is the challenge that, as you say, the hospitality sector, big, important employer, a big, important driver of the economy, generates 5% of GDP and £54 billion in tax every year, which is equivalent to the police and security budget. It is struggling post-COVID. So what we don't want to do is to impose something that would have further economic harm on a sector that is so important, and there is no doubt that there would be economic harm from further smoking bans and interventionist regulations. And Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak in 2021, 2023 rejected an outdoor smoking ban on the grounds of economic harm to the hospitality sector. So I would urge people to think again, there are other ways that we can move smoke-free without interventionist regulation.
So I want to take this in stages. So I am old enough to remember by the way, only just old enough to remember, I started in a newsroom where there were ashtrays on the desk. I have smoked a cigarette on a plane when that was, the seats
You
at
are
the back.
old.
I am old, yeah, exactly. I remember interviewing Patricia Hewitt in 2007, about 2007. It wasn't in 2007. And she admitted to me that she quite frankly just wanted to ban smoking. And Blair wouldn't let her. Because
Yes.
she said it's too far. So are we all agreed, therefore, that outright banning of it simply doesn't work? You might feel passionately that it's the right thing to do, but it doesn't. It's not effective. It doesn't work because, as you said, people choose to smoke in their own homes, or you simply just, make it.
Now I'm not.
Prohibition doesn't.
Now I'm not an MP and not seeking re-election. I can
like
say this.
now.
Prohibition is a policy so absurd that a movie was made starring children to illustrate its absurdity with their marshmallow guns. What was it called?
Bugsy Malone.
Bugsy Malone. Prohibition is a fool's errand. I went to a drug and alcohol rehab clinic, residential centre with ex-offenders. One of the guys was in for murder. One was in for GBH, but he was lucky he hadn't killed the guy. He smashed his head in with a paving slab, put him in a wheelchair. And these guys had horrific stories of all the stuff that they'd done and all the rest of it. But that's another story. There's still a full-length documentary of it out there. And I've got a lot of sympathy with addicts. But the point is, I asked them, what drugs are available? Because I've never done drugs. It's lovely to be able to say that. I've never done drugs. Great. I've never done them, never would. But I asked them naively, but what drugs are available in prison? And they all laughed at me. All drugs are available in prison. And the idea that prohibition is a good thing is completely insane. I only haven't talked about this issue because very early on after I was elected, I said to my association at a meeting, as you do, said, if we want to reduce the prison population and reduce offending, we have to take a dramatically different approach to drugs. And my chairman came up to me afterwards and said, Steve, don't ever talk about that again. And I knew what he was saying. And he's a young man, but prohibition's ridiculous and manufactures criminality. And the idea that we should add to the burden of the war on drugs by having a war on tobacco through prohibition is completely absurd. Even as
But your point
detest
is not just a principled position about that, but it's also because it's impractical.
It's impractical, yeah. If you can't keep drugs out of prison, and you can't, and anyone who says otherwise is kidding themselves, you can't keep drugs out of prison. It's the most controlled environment any human being can live in, and you can't keep drugs out of prison. Prisoners can get what they want. If you can't do it there, you're not going to do it out of the dog and duck down the road. And if we're really serious about criminality and offending, and indeed if we've got a heart for those who suffer, we should start taking a dramatically different approach to how we deal with drugs and offending, even as I detest drugs and detest tobacco. But people who want to ban tobacco, I mean, they're just kidding themselves.
And presumably this is part of the argument you were making to government about it's about helping people away from this. It's not about going, stop it, we're just stopping it, we're shutting it down.
Well, there are
The
2 points. Yeah,
practicalities
I mean,
don't
there are
work.
2 points I'd make. The first is, I mean, actually at Philip Morris, we have said that, with the right regulatory, societal and market forces in place, we imagine that we could stop selling cigarettes within the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, I'll just go back slightly to Steve's point as well, is that the data's already there. When you look at the latest stats from, say, the KPMG report on illicit tobacco in this country, it's around 1 in 4 cigarettes smoked currently are already from the illicit market. So, whilst I don't comment on the prohibition element, I would comment on the fact that there's already in the marketplace avenues where serious and organised crime is profiting from the sale of illicit cigarettes. And in fact, we released a survey of London storekeepers only today, in fact. And one of their biggest concerns is the impact that is having on their societies.
So we've sort of worked out that prohibition is impractical. We've had measures already. I actually was quite pleased when they brought it from banning it indoors, because I was a smoker and I didn't like pubs that were full of smoke and secondhand smoke. Now there is this proposal about pub gardens. On the grounds that we've just established that prohibition is probably quite impractical. Presumably that's the big argument, is how do you expect us to enforce this? How would it be enforced? Does it make any sense?
It's difficult to be able to comment on the detail of it because there is no detail at the moment. We just know that the government is looking at doing this, and it was a proposal that was floated in the press without any consultation, any discussion with business, any prior notification or warning. So we don't know what they're looking at. However, it's far wider than pub beer gardens. That gets the journalistic headlines because that's the bit that has public support and sympathy, or the pub is an interesting case study to be able to look at. But when you talk to the civil servants who are looking at this is any public area is where they are looking at it. So they're talking about places that children are present, parks, beaches, hospitals, schools, outside sports grounds, 250 or 600 metre exclusion zones around premises. So where are you going to have people moving and smoking, and what are you going to do? So how would you...
What you've just described feels like a total ban under the auspices of a pub garden.
That is exactly what, the logical conclusion is that it is prohibition, or you don't have the guts as a political legislature to say you want to ban smoking and you want to ban the sale of cigarettes, but you're going to do it by different routes. Because if you think about the logic of that, how are you going to be able to enforce it? Where are you going to be able to do it? In a pub garden or on tables and chairs, we could easily be able to look at doing that and enforcing it, but how are we to do that? Where is the harm to anybody else from a smoker in a segregated area smoking? But then if you take it to its extreme, when the day the announcement was leaked to the press, I was in Brighton, and you've got cafes and restaurants, a small strip of pavement and tables and chairs. So are you seriously going to say that they can't smoke in there and you can't smoke at the table? What are you going to do in the bit in between? Who's going to enforce that? Where are you going to be able to get those enforcement powers from, and who is going to take that further forward? So, there are real major implications for this. And I go back to the fact that this is activist civil servants who've developed proposals for smoke-free by 2030. It was proposed and rejected on economic grounds in 2021 and 2023. But there's no economic impact assessment that's come alongside this latest iteration of it. It is just policy by speculation.
Steve, we've established you don't like the nanny state. This is a moral feeling and a principle feeling about it. Does that sort of rings bells with me, having spent time in government, you spent time in government, knowing that certain bits of legislation can be mooted, certain ideas can be mooted, and underneath it, when you actually get down into the detail, go, this goes way bigger than, and also doesn't answer the question, what's the impact, and how on earth would you enforce it? I mean, we've seen it, right?
Yes, we have. In fact, in the House of Commons as backbencher, I remember fondly speaking against a private member's bill, which was actually a handout from Number 10, as often happens. So I know you'll find that hard to believe. And it was about 4 entirely socialist clauses. I forget the name of the bill now. And I spoke so passionately against them that 3 of them were dropped, which was great. Then it went into committee. And when it went into committee, it came back out about that thick, and it was even worse. And I thought that was the bureaucrats' revenge. So on your point about things going way beyond, yeah, we've got to be very, 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 very careful. But I'm afraid the fundamental point is about the right to coerce and the duty to obey. By what right do politicians turn up in Parliament and say, you shall not, for your own good? By what right in a society of free and responsible adults? And I don't like to see people harming themselves, and certainly there's a strong case that addicts are victims of their own addiction. But let's not deny people agency. I think we rob them of human dignity if we rob them of the agency, even if they're addicted. And I think our heart for them should be big enough to encompass the dignity of having agency over what they do. And if they're determined that it makes them happy to smoke, and with all that they know it entails, they should be allowed, even though I mourn the loss of people who've died doing it.
So we moved, I think we've established a sort of agreement that prohibition is not on the table, which brings us to the topic of, then in which case, it's a little bit like the I think it's Aesop, the sun and the wind, you know. Don't force them, you've got to persuade them, right? And that seems to be exactly where you've been coming from with this. It's about persuasion and giving them options to choose elsewhere. So they're still making their own choice.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about if you want to give smokers a chance, you've got to give them a choice. So for us, what underpins everything is that existing adult smokers need access to information and the full range of alternatives. And so when regulation, thinking of Steve's point, when regulation is formulated, it's really important to us that that is evidence-based. It's really important that actually it is going to support adult smokers switching. And it's really important that when it hits the market, it's actually implemented in such a way or written in such a way that it will have the effect that it wants, the desired effect.
Now, you and I have been out for dinner. We are friends, as it happens, and you know that I use that, which is snus, which is tobacco pouches. I'm enjoying tobacco right now because it's wildly addictive. It's very difficult to do it, and will of mine. That is still not available because the EU said we couldn't sell it here. Alternative, giving choice, give people a chance by giving them a choice. We should be able to maximise the choice, right? If there is less health risk with that, and there is much less health risk with that.
Honestly, I look at it in disbelief. I don't know why you do this to yourself. Why do you do this to yourself?
Because I was addicted to nicotine. It's one of the most wildly addictive substances.
But this is similarly wildly addictive, but not as harmful to you.
It's so not as harmful as smoking that the Norwegian Health Ministry... you've written the wrong bit. The Norwegian Health Ministry actually said, we would prefer you to do... Can you imagine...
Well,
the NHS saying that, or the Department for Health?
I did a video in Wickham about vaping, and I was actually videoed taking an enormous puff of, do they call them 8 ohms or sub-ohms or something, I don't know, but one of these enormous ones. Because I would prefer people to do less harmful things. Of course I would, because of a heart for them. I'd like you to live a long time. You're a great man, and you add to our lives. But I think when we're talking about what we can do, we're always talking about legislating, and that means coercion. And, well, I mean, do we want to coerce you into that? I mean, a lot of it is about tax. Maybe tax on that should be very...
But that plays into Duncan's point about you're giving me a choice. I could choose to stop smoking cigarettes and vaping because I didn't want it in my lungs anymore. And I could choose an option because an option was available.
I absolutely think that the option should be available. And as I said earlier, I think that PMI, you bringing forward these various alternative products is a very good thing. and certainly the state, the health establishment, even if they're authoritarians who think they're entitled to coerce other people, they should welcome the production of alternatives that are less harmful, surely.
So we might chip away at that sort of residual group that still smokes by giving them choice. But you also seem to be saying, let's just accept there are some people who enjoy smoking. There are some people who find it almost impossible to give up. They've been doing it so long. And that we should accommodate that. Now, the idea is to give them choices so that nobody smokes cigarettes anymore.
Sure.
How do you marry that? How do you get there and still serve customers?
Well, you can only nudge people, and you can take people a little bit on a journey, but you can nudge them. But what you can't do is get too far ahead of them and where they are. So back to your talk with Patricia Hewitt, the reason that the smoking ban worked when it was implemented in 2007 was that we'd worked for 5 years to transition customers into segregated areas, ventilated spaces. The industry had worked so that you could accommodate people, so that when it came in, still had a really big impact. We still saw a drop of 10% in sales in pubs, and we lost 5% of the pub estate as a direct result of the smoking ban. So there is an economic harm. And I think what COVID taught us is that we need to look at what is the health objective we're trying to achieve, and how can we achieve it with the least economic harm to jobs, businesses and growth, and also make sure that we bring people with us so that
He's going out for a fag.
He's going out for a fag.
No, he's not. He hates smoking. He hates smoking. He's be back shortly. Carry on.
So that we can accommodate those people, so that, yes, you will nudge them gently ahead. But what you won't do is if you bring in something that is very strict, very draconian, that gives them no space and opportunity to move and moderate their own behaviour, then they will respond with sort of different consequences. So as I say, yes, if we accommodate them and find a space, part of it is about the industry being able to manage that and provide a space for people. It's also a practicality point, in the same point about prohibition. You need to accept that people are going to still be smoking. Where do you want them to smoke? In a safe, responsible, supervised environment where you can make sure that there is provision? Or do you want them smoking in their own home, or smoking in an indoor environment, or breaking the law? And I think that's about the practicality of how you move this forward if the government decides to impose a ban on outdoor smoking.
So there's an integration there of, if this is what you want to achieve, work with us to help you get there, and let's work together. How much collaboration in the political sphere, in the government sphere, you're smiling already, do you get with trying to move this forward? Because I bet there is still a little bit of that, we don't talk to the tobacco companies, or we don't do this. Is there a response that's sensible? You go, okay, we can probably work with you on that. Or are they just leaving you to make the running?
So we definitely would like to have a closer dialogue with government on all of these issues.
And before you get to that, am I right about that's possibly why they don't? That they sort of a bit hands off?
So the UK government subscribes to something written by the WHO Framework of Tobacco Control called Article 5.3, which states that they shouldn't engage with the tobacco companies unless it's transparent and on matters of regulated importance. We would very happily subscribe to that transparency and matters of regulated importance. But that sentiment is not always reciprocated.
And would not something like is being suggested, a ban on outdoor smoking, that is about regulation. Surely those are the grounds upon which you can have a discussion.
I think that's a great question to put to government.
Yeah. It's like lots of questions I put to government working inside it. Fair enough. So there's not enough engagement. All right. Part of the question is, so how do we take that forward? One of it would be there should be dialogue between all of these sides. In the absence of that, what are you doing to push this forward? Say, all right, if you're not going to engage with us on this, this is how we will be taking this forward as PMO.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've invested over £10 billion in reduced risk products over the last few years. And we are very clearly trying to demonstrate by our investments and our actions that we are, behind this transition. For us, we have now, as I said at the start, over 40% of our global net revenues from reduced risk products. That's going to be increasing to pushing 65% within the next few years. And so we are determined through every interaction with consumers or existing adult smokers to give them the choice and show them the alternatives.
And how many choices? I mean, in the end, you have a product stream.
Yep.
And others may have other products may be available.
Yep.
But are you living that choice? Is it our choice to smoking cigarettes is X product or a range of products?
Yeah. I think we're best known for our heated tobacco products. I think that's absolutely true. We also do vaping products, and actually through our acquisition of Swedish Match just 2 years ago, we now, obviously very, very big globally in nicotine pouches, which, just for the record, are also different from snus, a product we're also involved in other countries.
Oh, right, okay. Well, anyone wants to get in technicalities, I'll talk snus anytime. All right. Do you then think that the way, I mean, as you said, this thing was announced, and Steve, you will know politically, sometimes politicians will fly a kite, see how it flies, and if there's a massive pushback, it gets quietly dropped. But if they're moving forward with that, and there doesn't seem to be the dialogue that possibly is necessary, how much damage does that do to an industry like you if you're pushed along that line as opposed to working steadily, incrementally to make it happen and work with?
It's hugely damaging. I mean, in the first instance, there is the immediate impact that we've seen on investment into a sector. If you suddenly have announcements, we've had one on alcohol licensing hours, we've had pub closure hours, you've had smoking bans. That succession of announcements can damage investment into a sector that's as big and important as hospitality, because you can see how a government can knock off track people's plans and investment, and it immediately has an impact on your revenues. I was talking to a firm of advisors. A multi-million pound deal of FDI going into the sector was put on hold immediately because the revenues might be under threat. You just don't know. In the most extreme circumstances of the bill as it's been talked about and the proposal on outdoor smoking, our members estimate that you could see a 20% drop in revenue. That's a really significant drop in revenue when your top line revenue is not enough to cover the costs. We operate on very tight net profit margins in hospitality of around 4%. If you suddenly have a big impact on your top line, you would see an impact on business failure and closures. You are going to see an impact on growth. You are going to see an impact on investment. So part of it depends on the time scale, and part of it depends on the detail. If you set the health objective and we work with you to get it right and manage it in a way that can be implemented sensibly, that meets consumer need, meets health harms, but also allows businesses to operate profitably. And also there are then knock-on impacts around public nuisance, around the venues, particularly in the late night. If you're then pushing people outside and well outside the venue to be able to smoke, if you have that exclusion zone, you then have your license under threat. So again, it's just a cumulative impact of threats that could have that impact on investment.
Again, leave the principle, we got that established, but again, from your experience, how often do some of these measures, they sound the right thing to do, they feel like the moral thing to do for the people that want them to happen, and that economic assessment is simply not, that impact assessment is simply not made?
Well, absolutely. I mean, or if it's attempted, it's not attempted adequately, and COVID would be the absolutely paradigmatic example. Those of us who at the time were saying that the costs of lockdown appear to vastly outweigh the benefits, I think we look quite vindicated at the moment. We were ever so careful, but we were vilified at the time. And that was a classic. The government did attempt a cost-benefit analysis, and we insisted on it, and people worked very hard to produce it, but I'm afraid it wasn't very good. And within about 2 minutes of it being in the hands of journalists, it had been rubbished. So, yeah, I mean, just to answer your question in its own terms, yeah, cost-benefit analysis and economic analysis is very often very poor. And also, worse than that, and this is really important, when you ask a public health official about public health, they give you an answer about public health. And I've seen this. I've sat in the room with the relevant officials and the relevant minister when they were asked about closing hospitality early. And the point is, a lot of venues need 2 covers through on the night to be profitable. So if you ask the public health expert, should you close restaurants earlier, from a public health point of view, I was just concerned about the propagation of COVID, they'll say yes. But then when you sit in the same room with the same person and say, what about the profitability of venues, they just close down because that's not their problem.
But equally, even then, we were sitting there on the outside because we weren't necessarily always brought in. But you have that, we'll close everybody at 9 o'clock. And the first thing we said was, you've just got everybody on the street at the same time, and you've got everybody heading to the tubes and the buses at the same time. There are consequences that businesses who operate in this space know and understand. And you can see exactly the same type of thing. If you can't smoke in a pub garden and you can't smoke 250 metres outside the premises, you're going to be on the park or the green all together in a little cluster. I mean, it's just those unforeseen consequences that they just have a blind spot on.
I do think we've got to be realistic about what actual smokers are like. Now, there's only a limited number I know because there aren't that many around. But the smokers I know, and I know one of them at least is watching this, and he cares very much about his health. But his attitude to the state telling him not to smoke, I won't put words around it, but it's basically to put up 2 fingers. He wants the state to stop telling him what to do. And that's very common to smokers. They want us all to get out of their lives and stop telling them. They know it's harmful and they want to do it anyway. And any attempt to tell them otherwise is regarded with contempt. Now, how do you argue with that? It's a choice, it's well informed. Are they addicts and victims? You could say that, but I wouldn't deny the individuals I know, the agency, they're choosing to do it. But this, again, is back to human dignity and choice. And I'm afraid those are matters of principle as well as practice.
Can I just add as well that, in some of the conversations with Department of Health officials, they have gone beyond smoking and they also want to restrict vaping in hospitality venues and in and around public buildings. So again, that's if you're trying to transition people away from smoking, I mean, it is partly a thin end of the wedge kind of point that if they start on one thing, they'll go into another. But if you're transitioning people from cigarettes, the route through is to smoke-free alternatives or vaping or the alternative lower harm tobacco products. But if you also then stop people from doing that, you have got a very prohibitionist approach that is just going to be counterproductive.
So they come from the main product, and you said give them a choice, and now they're coming for some of the choices.
And this is why I say, it's really important to look at the evidence. It's really important to, get to grips with the science, the relative toxicities. And if we think back to, Public Health England before OHID, Public Health England was very upfront and consistent in its messaging about vaping being 95% or up to 95% less harmful than smoking combustible cigarettes. And yet we're still in a society where some surveys will suggest that up to 50% of the population think that it's as harmful as cigarettes. And it's this sort of misinformation that we need government and society to take the time to get to grips with evidence-based and scientifically substantiated alternatives so that the transition can occur in the best way for existing adult smokers.
I love doing these panels because I have the privilege of being able to ask questions, learn new things and debate them, but it's time for you to ask some questions. Do I have some questions? We do. I will try to get through all of these. Let's do the first 2 on the front and then I'll come to those in the back.
Charles Amos, head of the grassroots campaign against the tobacco ban. If backing the tobacco ban diminishes the profits of your company, do you think your shareholders will be too pleased? And also, is the panel aware that wood smoke actually causes a greater amount of cancer relative to the same quantity of tobacco smoke?
Thank you very much for a brief question because I like those. Go ahead.
Well, I may disappoint you now. My apologies in advance. But I think Duncan just touched on the fact that I think that the current estimate for the relative safety of e-cigarettes is that it's 95% safer. I think some companies previously went with a figure of 99%. In the face of the fact that now evidence shows that over 20% of 11 to 17-year-olds have vaped, and hundreds of thousands of those never previously used any sort of tobacco products, should we be concerned about the fact there could be millions of people who are newly addicted to nicotine products on the basis of this? And should we perhaps be reconsidering whether we include those in the smoking statistics?
There was a question in the end there. That's great. Excellent. Let's do those. Go straight for it.
I'll take the second one first, if that's okay. So we are extremely clear that our products are only designed for existing adult smokers. I think that it's very clear, and we believe that children, youth, no one under the age of 18 should ever use a nicotine product. And actually, we support regulation amongst flavours and amongst packaging potentially that is going to try and ensure that products are only ending up in the hands of the existing adult smokers. So that's the position, and that's what we believe. Working backwards, wood smoke, I don't think I'm qualified to comment on, so I won't, if that's okay. Backing the tobacco ban, well, listen, what our position is actually that measures that can support a smoke-free future are positive measures. But they have to be evidence-based, they have to be applied in the right way. And if I just reflect on your shareholder point, I think that we obviously have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders. That's absolutely true. We are a New York-listed large global corporation. But actually, I think historically what we've seen is a lot of rewards from the markets for our position, for the transition we're making, and a lot of belief in the reasons and the profitability in that over the long term.
Either of you want to pick up on those? Or
Yeah,
reflect?
I just want to say to Charles, we live in an age where there is an excessive authoritarian puritanism abroad, which is unworthy of human dignity and life. For the love of God, don't tell the fascists that wood smoke is dangerous, because they'll be banning barbecues, they'll be banning wood smoke. It'd be reasonable. If we cared about wood smoke really seriously, what we'd do is we'd bring reliable electricity to Africa. And we wouldn't be, we should be... I think sometimes we lose sight of what is and isn't a really serious well-being problem, where we should, if we, whatever we means, where it's legitimate to tax people to do something about it. And you alarm me, because I know you'll be heard, and they'll want to ban people burning wood next.
I'm going to take two more. There's one very much at the back there. You, sir, you were, and I'll see if we can squeeze you in at the end.
Is perhaps the answer not to try and stop the people who are complaining? I am a rabid anti-smoker, ex-smoker, and I can't stand the smell of cigarettes. If I'm in a pub garden and there's someone whose smoke is drifting across and interfering with my meal, it enrages me, and I hate walking into a pub through a smoke-filled porch. Now, if you stop the complaints, perhaps they won't try and change or introduce legislation, which I think, agree, is unfair.
Can I just reply to that? It may be that as a rabid ex-smoker, you're just the right messenger to convey some of these effects. Now, I'm really sceptical of behavioural science, but I find I've become a friend and colleague to Professor Paul Dolan at the LSE, a great behavioural scientist. He was the lead author on the Mindspace document, which I've always loathed, but nevertheless, M is for messenger. Maybe it's the case that as a rabid ex-smoker, you're the right messenger to get out there. But at the moment, we're doing something very wrong, that smokers want to put two fingers up to those speaking to them, and something's going to have to change about the messengers. If in a non-state way, just as a matter of humanity, we want to improve public health, maybe you're the right messenger, I don't know.
The drift thing, I did want to come to that.
Yes.
Segregated areas, yeah, whatever. I mean, come on. It's changing the wind and it comes blowing across. Is there anything like a segregated smoking area?
There are, and we've made heavy investments in outdoor areas and outdoor smoking provision, so that when the smoking ban came in initially in indoor smoking, you provided a space that smokers could smoke in, and you've got more space now in the beer gardens that is smoke-free than is smoking. And certainly where food is prevalent, that is the biggest area where you're seeing smoke-free even outdoors as well. But that will be different for different types of premises. And obviously, if you want to go somewhere entirely smoke-free and you don't want to have cigarette drift, then you're going to have to choose a venue that is probably more in keeping with that, and certain ones will be more than others. You can't avoid smoke drift, and you can't avoid some degree of passing people in the street who are smoking. Personally, I don't like walking through a fog of vanilla vape juice that comes out, but I accept that people are consuming a legitimate product, and I try and avoid those bits where I want to. But we are investing heavily as a sector in making sure that there are choices for people to go to who want to sit and eat and drink in a smoke-free environment.
I'm with you. I often find the ex-smoker is the most rebellious about it. I can't stand the smell of it anymore. We were going to do 2 questions, so you missed yours.
Yeah, I take Steve's point about if you mention further things to ban them, they will just ban them. But having said that, I have had friends and family members whose health has been quite significantly affected by alcohol. So why not an alcohol-free future as opposed to a smoke-free future?
That's great. And shall we just pass it back there, and we'll take 2 in a row.
Thanks very much. Richard Cleary, Imperial Brands. I wonder if the panel have any thoughts on countries that have got this right. For example, Sweden, where the smoking rates have gone down to fewer than 5%. Or the other hand, Australia, where they've had very restrictive vape restrictions and smoking rates have gone up. I wonder if we have any thoughts on what we could learn from that.
Do you want me to take the alcohol one first?
Yeah, why not?
Given that I'm responsible for all the sins. I think there is a big distinction between alcohol and tobacco. You can consume alcohol, again, both legal products. So we have to go back to, if these products are legally available, then there is a right to be able to have a retail space and a place for consumption. Unlike tobacco, alcohol is not harmful when used responsibly and drunk in moderation. I think everybody acknowledges that tobacco, from the first time you smoke it, can damage your health. And the same is not true of alcohol. 85% of the population already drink responsibly within the weekly guidelines, which are incredibly low. They are 14 units, which is not that much. What we ought to be doing then is encouraging people to drink responsibly in a supervised environment, which I would suggest is the pub, or the hospitality venue, which is twice licensed. The person serving you, the premises, both of those are licensed. They will be there to be able to make sure that they are serving you a regulated amount, that you can guarantee what you are drinking, and that there is somebody at the end of the day to tell you that you've had enough and you are no longer allowed to have anything. So that's a responsible environment within which alcohol can be consumed. And for the overwhelming majority of people, there is no harm. 25% of the population currently do not drink at all, and that is only growing in under 24s. So we are providing choice and flexibility and a wide range of alcohol-free, low and no products. So I don't think we should be looking at an alcohol-free future. However, I'm kind of with Steve here. Please don't talk about it loudly, because the same health civil servants that are going for tobacco will then come back after vapes, will come back after alcohol, will then come for food. They are the same. They are an activist civil service.
Do you want to pick up on the points about where it works and where it perhaps hasn't worked? And presumably, you researched that.
Well, I'll answer Alistair's question even more directly. Yes. So I think, as you mentioned, Giles, Sweden is a great example of a country where a non-combustible tobacco product, so not a cigarette, not a roll-your-own cigarette either, but in their case, snus, has actually ended up in a a adult smoking population of less than 5%, which is where the UK itself says it wants to get to. So I think there are good examples. In Australia as well, I think the example there that you were trying to get at is the fact that the restrictions that they've put in place, in their case it was against the vaping market, did just lead to a huge rise in illicit vapes in the country, which again goes back to the point we were making earlier around, transitions need to be managed. They need to be based on evidence, and they need to have the consumer, the existing adult smoking consumer, at their heart. Because if those pillars aren't in place, then the unintended consequences could potentially be more harmful.
Do I have one more?
Can I just come in on
Yeah,
that?
go on. Sorry, Steve.
Look,
Yes, you said.
Sorry, this is such an important and profound matter for the future of the Conservative Party. I really believe it is. I'm an engineer, that's my profession, and I genuinely therefore believe in practicality, because of course I do, I'm an engineer. But if you're a professional engineer, you also have to care about robust ideas. So it's practical action and ideas. And one of the stupidities of the Conservative Party is we keep rejecting ideas. Let's just deal with the practicalities. And that's why this country's in such a mess. I could show you the charts and graphs. I've released them on my social media. Nobody takes a blind bit of notice. But look at 100 years of history. It's the growth of the state. Look at the OBR's chart with revenue racing away and tax, even at these high levels, stagnating there. Massive gaps. We've got to do something really different because we're headed into a financial disaster. And all the time we refuse to talk about ideas and hard principle, we're still heading down the road to ruin because we end up being merely conservative. We take the institutions and ideas we're given and just try and make them work. And on some of these things, we do need to be, I'm afraid, ideological. We just need to hear an idea and say, no, not only take that idea away, but stop working on it and don't bring it back, and don't bring it back to the next minister either, because that's not what the Conservative Party does. And in particular on the practicalities, I'm sorry, there's loads of stuff in this life which is profoundly harmful to well-being if misused. One thing is, as you say, Rhys, it's alcohol. It does enormous harm, but, I expect the majority of us in here will use alcohol. But I can tell from practical experience that adultery causes massive harm. Not that I've been unfaithful, but my parents are divorced. That the harm caused to this country by adultery is absolutely immense and leads to an enormous demand for housing. And every time a family splits, that's doubling of the housing demand. And yet we don't ban it, but it causes immense harm to well-being. And I think we've got to start thinking in terms of this: what is our right to coerce and what is somebody's duty to obey? And the right to coerce across a wide range of harms is extremely limited.
How many of you, hands in the air, are in favour of this prohibition on smoking outside? Well, that tells its story.
We're in the
doesn't
right
it?
place.
We're in the right place. Maybe the ideas are being had. If there's one more, I will take it. Otherwise, I will let you all go and start your evening. Yes, there is. Please do. It's coming.
Thank you. Brian from Somerset. My question is this. My sense is that some of the activists have moved from being anti-smoking to being anti-tobacco. Am I right? And if so, does that mean that things like heat not burn and other tobacco products might start coming under threat of greater regulation?
Do you want to take that on? It is, after all.
So this goes back to something I said earlier. I think if you look, for example, at the government's consultation on excise on vape products, towards the start, it has a statement that all tobacco products are harmful. And I think that it's really important to do, as I said earlier, is to look at the evidence and to look at the relative levels of toxicity. So, for example, if you're talking about a heated tobacco product, those release up to 95% less harmful and potentially harmful chemicals than combustible cigarettes. The harm from combustible cigarettes comes from the burning of it. I think that as we go through this conversation that is going to continue, it's really important that all of the sectors and all of the stakeholders should have a voice. It should be a balanced conversation that's one that's based on science and it's based on evidence. And it's one where, consumers, adult consumers, smokers, are also listened to. And I believe that, as I said right at the start, if we're going to help give smokers a chance, then we have to give them a choice. And to do that, there has to be access to information that is fact-based and that is fair.
I've got one last bit for you, Steve.
Oh, right.
Children, we were last year here at this conference, Rishi unveiled something, and it was a plan to stop children becoming smokers in the future. And some of the principles we've been talking about of choice are always applied to rational adults of a certain age, and we do make a differentiation between adults and children. Does your principle still stand there, or was that just tinkering around the edges, or it's just like stop talking about it, stop thinking about it? We believe in...
When Rishi announced the policy, a camera was immediately shoved in my face after.
I wonder why.
And I had to find some way of... I didn't want to start... This is a problem. This is why power corrupts, even for someone as determined to be true as me. Was determined not to set the hair running that a minister was going to vote against. So I said, well, I can see the merits of his point of view from a utilitarian perspective, or whatever it was. But then I voted against when the moment came. But it's a question of choosing your words very carefully, so you don't give the media the split that they want, but you get yourself through with your... But I couldn't believe it, I'm afraid. I thought, why on earth are you doing this now? Of course children should be protected, and of course where children grow up in smoking households, it's prejudicial to their health. But we really do have to decide what it means to be a responsible adult. And, if you ask me, to your point about banning tobacco, if you ask me about what voluntary choices people should make, then I'd be anti-tobacco. But if you ask me what coercion should be applied, it's a different question. And this is the Conservative Party conference, and politics is about what we coerce people into doing and what we coerce them, what we punish them for doing if they do go. It's about power and the legitimate use of force. And as I've set out my view, I think children should be protected. I mean, I regard smoking as an evil. I'm very clear about that. Children should be protected from it. But
thank you very much indeed. Thank you to our panel. Thank you, PMI, for sponsoring this. Keeps us doing what we're doing, keeps us having these discussions. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great evening, and thanks very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.